Good afternoon, everybody. And just for those if this happens to be your first just an hour, this is an informal space that we have created for having some conversations and engage in some dialogue. Nothing too formal about that. And so sort of select topics from time to time. And it seems like that this was one of those topics where people had indicated interest. So I just would like to take a moment and say thank you, Brent, and thank you, Lennon, for agreeing to be here today. I just would like to welcome you. And so I'm just sort of assuming that what we're going to learn about is some of the differences from the traditional models that are existing in our classrooms these days, where a teacher happens to be responsible for everything, to the new things that we're learning from the next education workforce. So where there is this premise about variability that we have heard from our Dean Basile about that, it's no longer hidden, it's obvious, it's there, and how learning has become more personalized in these classrooms, constantly evolving into different directions. So, and the teams have become more of a necessity, not a luxury. It's something that needs to be structured in our spaces. And that's the promise that the next education workforce has made to those, settings. So with that, I'm not going to take much of your time. I'm just going to open it up for Lennon and Brent. Just please take it away from here and sort of enlighten us with the new things that you're doing in this space.
Well, sure. Thank you. This is really good to be with many people with whom we've been engaged in conversation for years, and Jeannie and others who have done research in these models and seen them firsthand, and others that have just been around watching and interrogating and asking questions for many years. We're going to share a few slides, probably 15, 20 minutes, and then lots and lots of time for questions. You'll see some new stuff. Pretty sure no one's seen it because it's newly created, and some new data that are coming out. So we'll just get right to it. And for some of you, there will be a few things that seem familiar, and for many of you, hopefully, you're going to walk away feeling like, oh gosh, like this is I didn't know that was happening, or I didn't know this was happening there. So get your questions ready, and we're going to have lots of free form conversation in the second part of this time together. I'm going to share screen. All these slides we can make available too, so you have time to look at them later. I maybe start with Brent Madden, Executive Director, Next Education Workforce. Been here for about 9 years. Joined by Lennon. Lennon, you want to say hi?
Sure, everyone. Hi, my name's Lennon Audrain. I lead our innovation and policy work on the Next Education Workforce team, and I'm a research assistant professor in the Division for Advancing Educator Preparation.
Well, without further ado, let us dip in here, and we'll start with the premise that, by and large, school is not working for nearly enough students, and unapologetically, in our work and world, also educators, and that we actually sometimes catch a little bit of like, wait, like it's not just about the kids. Well, no, it's not just about the kids. We believe that happy and healthy educators are also creating the learning environments for happy and healthy learners. So. We've taken to be thinking about this work as a paradigm shift from this normative notion of teachers of record to teams of record. And if you're looking for a hook to hang this in your brain, you should be thinking about this in terms of school staffing, or the new phrase that seems to have emerged and is sticking a bit, strategic school staffing. And why do we need to do this? Well, we could look at this in a lot of different ways. This was from 9 of 23 opinion piece in the New York Times about people not wanting to be teachers anymore, and can you blame them? This is sort of in the water. The PDK poll, which has been administered every few years since 1969, around public support of education. This is the question that asks parents whether or not they want their own child to become a teacher. For the first time in 2018-ish, those lines crossed, where now we had a majority of parents recommending that their own children not become teachers. This is the environment in which we're working, right? That 16% of teachers themselves would recommend the profession to others. Imagine placing teachers, aspiring teachers, as undergrads or as, master's students that are thinking about becoming teachers. Imagine placing them in that classroom. Like, it's like not selling the profession. When we look at in Arizona State, we buck this trend a bit, in part because of the some investments that the state has made in teacher recruitment and preparation. But by and large, we've seen as a sector 30% decline. This has rebounded a little bit in the last couple of years, but there's a 23 analysis. The story is still true that there are fewer people going into preparation programs. These data are from the dashboard, Arizona Department of Education, perennial challenges of teacher retention. The thing that I would call your attention to is the bottom right there, where we've got somewhere nearly 1 in 5 teachers that are leaving their classrooms every year. And that's a lot of churn that's happening. 4% of those teachers just about switching to a different school district, and 15% just dropping from. And if you look at the chart there, where the experience level of the teachers, we'll see that many of those, majority of those, have 4 years or fewer of experience. This is all painting the picture, and you combine all of that having to do with the workforce, along with what has been persistently, despite huge work and I think great effort by educators, like stubbornly, the student achievement results in math, 8th grade math, 3rd grade reading. This is from the progress meter here in Arizona, continue to be pretty stubbornly stuck just about these numbers and have been for a number of years. There are lots of factors that go into this, and all of this is the work and world in which we're operating. And we like to say that we don't just have insert the blank here, a teacher shortage problem, a people leaving the profession early problem, a student achievement problem, a student engagement problem, educator satisfaction problem, but also a workforce design problem, which then brings in this big notion of strategic school staffing and workforce design solution. We've been doing this work for now going on about 9 years. Opportunity Culture, an initiative of public impact, sort of a cousin organization of ours, has been doing this work for 10 plus years. Together, we're representing, I think, a couple of the biggest, what we would think of as technical assistance providers to K-12 schools. And, we're collectively working with a couple hundred, probably, school districts. We'll share more data in a second about where and with whom we're working. But, there's 14,000 school districts. So let us also temper our excitement about oh my gosh, lots of things are happening. And wow, there's a lot going on. And so we are anchored in this idea that we can build and sustain these teaching teams that will ultimately improve outcomes for both educators and students. That's the idea of the next education workforce. It's based in some of our the work around teams generally. This is Richard Hackman, who's done a lot of this work that describes teams as being stable, meaning that the members of those teams stay together for an extended period of time, for example, an entire school year, that the people that are on those teams know who their teammates are. There's no one that's thinking that they're on the 3rd grade team, but really isn't, right? And then the thing that's super interesting here is that this idea of interdependency, that members of the teams, there's something, the whole is greater than the sum of their parts, their collective efforts, and that we see that this last point in particular is a key differentiator between what a lot of people in education would say, oh, well, we have teams. We've got a third grade team, or we've got a high school science team, a grade level team, a subject team. We've got a data team. We've got a PLC. And the question that we often ask is, well, how interdependent are those educators? And so, Susan Moore Johnson and many others have written about this idea of the egg crate model of schooling. And it turns out that most of our schools in the United States, not all, but most, are organized in this egg crate notion, right? Here would be, for example, an eighth grade, 4 eighth grade teachers, each with subject area expertise, thank goodness. The thing that I would point your attention to in their respective egg crates is that each has a set of other responsibilities beyond just their content instruction that are strikingly similar, and that we're asking all of these teachers, in addition to being experts in their content area, to be expert in a lot of other things too. And in a very egg-crated model, there is not a lot of incentive to collaborate. And in fact, structurally, the way that we've designed most schools, 25 kids behind a closed door that swings on its hinges and opens, every 60 minutes or so. It's in Pavlovian style, a bell rings, the kids rotate, and you might even see that the prep schedules of the students are arranged as such. In this particular school, these 4 teachers, despite the fact that they might even teach the same 100 students, don't even have collaborative time to prepare. Structurally, the system is set up to make sure that these teachers remain in isolation. And so, again, no shade to the teachers. The system is designed to create a particular set of outcomes, mostly anchored in efficiency. Let's not talk about this in generalities. Let's think about it through the eyes and perspective of a single student. So meet Scott. This is in a traditional model. We've got Scott. He's an 8th grader. It's first period. It's the 2nd of February. And he goes to science class. Guess what happens on the 9th? And the 16th, and the 23rd. It's like kind of rinse and repeat. Scott, same 24 other students with him going to first period. There's something to be said for this, right? It is very efficient. The same educator with the same set of students for the same block of time. Very easy to keep track of things like Carnegie units and there's not a lot of mystery going on here. It's like it's 8:30 in the morning, you're in first period. But I would argue that it could be that model built for efficiency is not the best for learning and growth for both the young learners and for the educators as well. And so if we're going to move from this egg crate model to something that is more like a team-based model, okay, what would that look like? At the end of the day, the thing at Next Education Workforce that we try to get right every single time is to ensure that the same educators share the same roster of students at the same physical time period. And that when you get those 3 conditions to be true, we believe that you can actually construct all sorts of more interesting ways of organizing adults and kids and curriculum to produce better outcomes for both the young learners and the educators. So we're back to Hackman. We're thinking about this interdependence. In the previous model that I just showed you with Scott, there's not a lot of interdependence there. Whatever happens is sort of happening. So let's look at this in a Next Education Workforce model. We work with schools in particular around their master schedules such that we can create these conditions where the same students are shared by the same educators at the same block of time. Anyone that's ever designed a master schedule knows that it's really easy to say what I just said, really hard to actually execute that. But as you can see here, the other thing that happens to be true here is that those same 4 teachers sharing that roster of kids have prep at the same period of time. Some schools have even created conditions where they have multiple prep periods, one that might be an individual planning time, one that might be a collaborative planning time. We're doing some of that work. Lynn will probably say something about what's happening in Albuquerque, where we have a strong union presence and what we need to do in order to create these conditions in that sort of environment. So if we've moved from the egg crate to something that now looks like 100 students shared over 4 periods of time by these 4 teachers, notice that, yes, the math teacher is still teaching math because, switching over to ELA might be kind of weird. But some of those other tasks can be redistributed. It doesn't mean that people don't need to have expertise in data analysis, but it does mean that maybe one of the teachers is taking a lead and doing most of that work for the team, and that you can start to task shift some of that, what we think of as traditional work, across all of the educators on the team. There are lots of nuances on this. I'm giving you an 8th grade example. We've also got like a 3rd grade example. It does look different in 3rd grade than it looks different in 8th grade. And happy to get into that in our discussion. So let's check out what this team-based model might look like for Scott. And so here it is, Monday, first period, the 2nd of February. And in this particular case, Scott is joined by 99 other students and 4 educators, and those blue people are the community educators in the corner. There's lots of interdependence is actually happening among this team of educators as they're maybe kicking off an interdisciplinary unit. Some people, popular misconception, they think, oh, like Brent, you're talking about team teaching. It must mean that you've got 100 kids in some, cavernous space for extended periods of time. Very rarely in our models will you actually see lots of kids with multiple educators for huge extended periods of time. This actually ends up being something that's less frequent. In fact, it looks maybe more like if we move to the 9th of February, first period is actually not first period, but it's first and second period together. These 2 teachers are co-teaching. We've again learned a lot from our special education friends about various models around co-teaching and what can be happening. It could be that there's a 3rd teacher in the room. I'm giving you some versions of these models, 49 other students, Scott, and that they're mashing together science and ELA in this particular case. Imagine what that feels like to teach with somebody else. Imagine Scott getting these 2 content areas together simultaneously. They're talking to each other, literally, and in the design of the curriculum. We move to the 16th of February, first period actually looks just like regular school. And sometimes when you walk into the models, this is what you see because there is an intentionality, a strategy the team has employed to ensure that that the right kid is with the right educator, learning the right curriculum at the right time. And that, this is one of the hazards always about visiting a school is that it's just a snapshot when you really need is more of the scrapbook. But we're also finding that, there is this popular misconception about some of the team-based model, which is like, oh, it always has to be co or multi-teacher teaching. It always has to be interdisciplinary content. In some of our more advanced teams, those things are way more common than less common. But I think the larger point here is that the educator team is empowered to configure the learning spaces, the groupings, the content to best meet the needs of their students and to ensure that everyone's got access to grade level content. We moved to the last Monday in February. Scott here in first period, interestingly, is not going to science. He's actually, this is maybe a project-based week. He's actually reporting to the ELA teacher because it just so happens that Scott's got some voice and choice in the sort of project that he's creating. And that the ELA teacher has developed some particular expertise in that. They've also brought in a couple of those community educators again as project-based mentors that Scott can contact during that period. This is just giving you a sense or a taste of all of the sorts of different configurations that become possible when you have the same educators with the same students at the same time. So if this is built for efficiency, I would say that this is built to lean into the needs of particular educators and particular students in order to maximize both the academic growth of young people, but also their social emotional development as well. And then for educators themselves, they've got a lot more flexibility and autonomy with guardrails in these sorts of models. I want to leave us three big ideas, and then I want to pitch over to Lennon to talk about some specific work in Albuquerque, and then really talk about all the questions that you've got. So first big idea, teaming fits the context. There's no one model. We've got some common elements that we've been working on and revising since we started this work several years ago. Those new versions will come out soon. But what we have continued to find and continues to resonate with the larger field is that there is no one model. Like that the teaming and the teams that you design have to fit the context. This year, we're supporting about 128 schools, 16 states, serving about 33,000 students. There's 16 schools in the Netherlands of particular note. You'll see that the gravitational center of this work is here in Arizona, and a lot of work now happening in Michigan. In New Mexico, that 6 will probably go to 20-ish, 25 next year. There's some large state level contracts. There are some large school system level contracts. And much of this work is being supported by schools and contracts. We'll say more about that in just a second. The second big idea is that teaming takes time, and that this actually has some double meaning to it. The first is that durable change we have seen time and again moves at the speed of trust. It's iterative. The first models that schools build are they have to continue to tweak and change them. Often schools do not turn an entire school to teaming in a single year, but rather that grows over time. And the second meaning here is that teaming literally takes time, and that if you do not have the protected planning time, collaborative planning time for the educator teams, this work is likely to turn to dust pretty quickly. The way that we support schools, we've got a fairly structured approach to this at this point. That has not always been the case for people that have been following the work. They're like, Brent, how do you support the schools? It's a fairly ad hoc process. We now think of the work in 3 phases: exploring, preparing. Exploring could take as long as it needs to take. Sometimes it's as short as a couple of weeks. Sometimes it's as long as a couple of years. But once you have seen that there is a reason for doing this, and that as a school and system, you're deeply committed to that idea, you move into this phase of work called prepare for teaming, and that's usually a couple of months. Usually it happens in the spring before a fall launch. And this is at the level of schools and school systems and educators themselves who are working through all that's required to really help develop the protocols, the systems, the vulnerability and trust that's required for this work to really happen deeply, genuinely, interdependently. And then finally, this idea of implementation of these team-based models. We have providing on-site coaching, access to resources, some scaled professional learning as well for various sorts of educators and various sorts of roles. And that work can happen really over the course of 1 to typically 3 years. The longer you get in implementation work, the more that we are developing the internal capacity of the school systems to sustain the work themselves for the long haul. This work around strategic school staffing has been recognized in the Federal Register, which is what also helps to inform future large-scale grant competitions. We're excited to see if this actually surfaces in new versions of teacher quality partnerships, TQP grants, or teacher school leader grants, where TSL grants, maybe even SEED and some others. I think the first 2 are more likely, where the definition of team-based strategic school staffing really does harken back to what we have been thinking about: 2 professional educators sharing a common roster of students during the same block of time. In February, a Dear Colleague letter came out from Deputy Secretary of Education Kirsten Basler at the United States Department of Education, suggesting that any school system could apply. And many were already doing this, but it gave some more cover to people to make investments in strategic staffing using their title dollars. And what we found there, is that school systems will invest in this work We've got contracting systems. The university has been really helpful in helping us to work directly. Right now, about 55% of our $5 million operating budget, which we have to cover entirely ourselves, about 55% is coming from contracts, many of them through the use of, say, Title II dollars or Title I dollars. And then the other 45% is coming from philanthropy. We hope to grow the amount coming from contracted revenue to about 85%, 90%. Always have a little bit of philanthropy to help us continue to grow and deepen the work. And then finally, big idea number 3, we believe that teaming unlocks new possibilities. That when you get the same educators, the same kids, same time, that all of a sudden educators and schools and systems can operate in a different way that we believe in impacts everyone. And so, if you're thinking about teacher residencies or declining enrollment or our multi-tier systems of support or career-connected learning, right? Like the list goes on and on and on, including instructional coherence. We believe that if, as a district, you've committed to any of these things on the screen and more, that because the way that we bring adults around kids is so central, it's like right at the center of the instructional core, that clearly it's going to have an impact on anything else that we do. And we continue to see that, and we continue to see teaming open up more possibilities for people. So just to end on some outcomes before I pass here to Lennon, we've got a quasi-experimental design large school system in Arizona, multi-year, and the data that you're seeing here is coming from that headline: large teacher effects and positive and statistically significant student effects in reading and math in grades 3 through 8. Equivalent to 1 to 2 months of additional learning time. The percentages in terms of retention increases, greater job satisfaction as leading indicators, right, to all sorts of positive educator outcomes. We're also seeing that the teachers that are most likely to be retained are also some of our most effective teachers, as judged by their teacher evaluation instruments, controlling even for prior evaluation ratings. So we can get into more of the nuts and bolts of some of the outcomes if we want to, and a lot of this is available and accessible on our website. Lennon, I want to kick it over to you and let you drive your own slides. I'm assuming you want to do that, and
Sure.
then get your questions ready.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks in the room are familiar that we've been working in the past very deeply with Mesa Public Schools, but we've actually been working, as Brent mentioned, briefly when you saw the slide of all the states that we now all have expanded beyond Mesa and beyond our Arizona schools to other places. One of which is blossoming and blossoming very quickly, is Albuquerque Public Schools. And so I just want to give you kind of a sense of the implementation overview in Albuquerque Public Schools. And as Brent mentioned, right, contract versus grants, Albuquerque Public Schools is an example of a large school system that put out an RFP, particularly around middle school redesign, which included a component of teaming that our team applied for and then was awarded. And then right now we're just waiting on some signatures back. The board voted to extend our contract for another 2 years with the school district. And so we'll be doing some more deep work with Albuquerque Public Schools, not just in their middle schools, but also now in 9th grade. And so I think it's just helpful also to Brent showed you the roadmap, but to understand the implementation kind of side of what our work looks like in just one particular context, in a context that is contracting with us for services. Middle school teaming has grown, and the initiative is spreading quite organically across the district. So you can see in fall 2025, we launched a cohort of about 6 schools, and then landed. We're at about like 5.5, 6 right now as the work happens. Right, some teams grow faster than others. Some teams have some challenges along the way, and that's all part of the work. And as districts engage with us, they know that is all part of the work. We're very as candid about that up front. And about next year, these numbers need to be updated because they don't include the high schools. But our goal for spring 2026 was to have for cohorts 1 and 2, we've cohorted schools intentionally as they move through the different phases of that roadmap. The goal was to have 14 total middle schools. There are actually 15, and we will be working with about 9 high schools come the fall around next education workforce for at least the next 2 years through June 2028. And so, we of course have, and I think our team, as the work gets described, because the unit of change is the team level, I think a lot of folks assume that we coach directly with educator teams, and that's not always the case. And we're testing a couple of theories of action right now about the best ways and the best levels of support to provide to schools. And so we provide really 3 main levels. And so educator supports are mostly scaled supports. And so those are educators who are coming to our scaled professional learning opportunities. We can talk more about what those scaled opportunities are in a minute. And then our direct coaching has moved, although we initially started with a lot of direct coaching to educators, we've now moved to coaching system and school leaders in this change. And Albuquerque Public Schools is a great example, right? Because it's not just one school or 2 schools within the district that we're looking to make this change, but 6, now 14, soon to be 25. And so being able to coach all of those educator teams is of course costly, and so what's the most scaled way to do that is to work through school and system leaders. And so these are just some of the things that have happened in the past year. Some redesigned processes. We worked closely with Albuquerque to change school funding formulas around modified FTEs, so how schools were able to do all of the collaborative planning time really required a change in the examination of how FTEs were allocated. We've worked very closely with their school master scheduling and student information systems. Lessons learned over the years about implementation and research is that if you want good data, you got to know who the teams are and the educators are, and there are ways to transform the systems ahead of time to make that process seamless. And then we've accelerated timeline for FTE information. And so again, these are lots of system level supports that we've done, right? Albuquerque, I think for some context, also is a school district of around over 100 schools. They have just around 65,000 students, just over 3,000 teachers. And so when you're thinking at the level of moving from on the previous slide, of those, there are about 30 middle schools, from 6 schools implementing teams to 14 implementing teams to eventually 30 in their redesign process implementing teams. You really have to think about all the systems and processes that either are accelerating that change at the systems level or really inhibiting it. Some of those, quite frankly, are the ones that we addressed this year around funding formulas and master scheduling. But then there are, of course, other ones like professional learning. And like if professional learning is all built for the one teacher, one classroom model, then that needs to be modified as well. The other piece of this, as I mentioned, in addition to our systems level supports, include leader level supports. So we've cohorted those schools and their principals and teacher leaders and their assistant principals together to create huddles and town halls where they're able to collaborate with one another, kind of understand the network of change that is happening in Albuquerque Public Schools. And then we've developed aligned initiatives. Interestingly, right, one of the questions that we've received in Albuquerque is, well, why not something local? Why go to ASU? Why Arizona State University in Albuquerque? That's not a question that if you've worked with any other folks nationally, we hear that all the time. And so we've been really intentional about being facilitators around things like the student-teacher pipeline. And so instead of just saying, oh, we should be your prep provider, although we're, of course, always open to that conversation, UNM already has an established relationship. And so using those student teachers that were in middle schools, what we've done is, as we've hired, New Mexico has a large statewide investment in teacher residencies. We've really collaborated with the district to say, well, if you're going to have student teachers and they're in middle schools, why don't we prioritize putting them on teams? Or if you're going to have residents, why don't you prioritize putting them on teams? And so our goal, as we're thinking about aligned initiatives, is really facilitative, especially when we're talking about working with local universities. And then we're starting to also, again, transition and thinking about collaborations at the elementary level and at the secondary level. And then lastly, of course, we are not the only initiative that the district is interested in. There's high dosage tutoring. There is understanding this how to create more collaborative planning time at the elementary level. There is an initiative to redesign high school. And so our goal when we work with school systems like Albuquerque is really to understand, okay, why partner with us in particular? What is the reason you might want teams to accelerate some of your priorities in the district? In middle school, in particular, their priority has been around the implementation of interdisciplinary learning. And so they see teams as a mechanism to better implement interdisciplinary learning. And so when we go and work with schools and systems, our goal is never teams as an end. It's teams as a mean to some larger priority and initiative. And as Brent mentioned, because there is no one model, we're always thinking about the ways that the archetypes of teams or the construction of teams might look different based on different priorities in the school. So it might always be for educators from four different subject areas. If the priority is around helping students to accelerate their understanding of nonfiction texts in science class, well, instead of just thinking about a humanities block, maybe you're actually creating a teaching team for science and ELA. And so we're very open, and of course we don't come in with the model. We ask districts what their priorities are, and then respond to the design in that way. Again, just an overview also of kind of like a breakdown of the kinds of supports that we're giving the schools. The different, these are just counts, not necessarily number of hours. It's a little misleading in terms of the number of engagements that we have at different parts of the system. This was actually a month and a half ago, so I know those counts are different, but we really are thinking about strategy meetings, professional learning, sessions with school leaders, and then you can see proportionally that we are still doing some educator team coaching, but it's not a whole ton as it might have been a few years ago. And just some information about the different types of schools that we're supporting in Albuquerque. It's 6 traditional schools. These are not magnet schools. These are not micro schools. They are just your traditional public elementary schools. They serve anywhere from 287 students all the way up to close to 900 students. And like many places across the United States, Albuquerque is wondering about declining enrollment and thinking very strategically about, right, as students start to move through the system, these cohorts of students in schools continues to get smaller. And so how might teams be leveraged in support of that? You can see here the math proficiency ranges from around 6%. So these are school site proficiencies. 6% of students in a given school being proficient, all the way to 41% being proficient. So we have a diverse range of proficiency in terms of math. And then ELA proficiency, 19% to 58%. Again, the school site level. So a school might be 19% or a school might be 58%. And they can fall anywhere within that range. Our next wave of cohorts will include anywhere again from that 260 to 865 range. And the math proficiency ranges did not shift a whole ton, but the ELA proficiency ranges absolutely did, right? That dropped from 19% to 9. And so again, as we're thinking about and start working with large school systems who are thinking about the first place that they might think about teams. We often say, of course, start small. You're not going to do a district transformation overnight. You're not even going to do a whole school-wide transformation overnight. We use that as a proxy for the people's understanding of the implementation site, not necessarily that the entire school is teaming in their first year. In fact, many of the cohort 1 schools have launched about 1 to 2 or 3 teams, and will slowly be adding teams as they go. That's where the roadmap comes in at both the system level and then the school level. But then also, we're very particular, I think, in pushing districts to also think about creating a diverse cohort of schools, that you don't want just your highest performing schools or your lowest performing schools in a cohort, that the heterogeneity of those cohort constructions actually provides something really unique and interesting. And so not just thinking about proficiency or even school size or the ESSA designation, we're thinking really expansively and push the district as they are identifying sites and working with schools who raise their hand to say, I think we're ready for this, to work in those places and to be really intentional about the construction. The last thing I'd say here related to our work is that we have a core affinity group. I know Denise is on here. I know Audrey is on here. I know Amber Benedict is on here. They are in our core affinity group in the Division for Advancing Educator Preparation. We've had lots of requests. Yes, we have this localized core affinity group here in the college that has been essential in helping us to really map the landscape of where this large college initiative is fitting into the teacher education curriculum. But we also have had increasing requests requests from other colleges of education to understand this work. The University of St. Thomas, Illinois State University, Loyola Marymount University, colleges of education in North Dakota, Appalachian State in North Carolina. More colleges are starting to wonder what their not only their roles could be in terms of like just larger understanding of the work, like we often get asked, this is such an interesting initiative that exists in a college of education. Like, should our college be thinking about something like that similarly? And then on the flip side, they're also saying, well, what do we need to do differently in teacher prep? And so I'm really excited if you're around on May 1st. We're going to have a core affinity group kind of demo day where we're going to produce kind of a set of products around and recommendations around what a more streamlined, what a more coherent set of experiences for students might look like in relation to their exposure to next education workforce. And so we'll be presenting that at the Core Affinity Group at our next division meeting in May. And so we're just really excited about the work that's coming out of our college that is increasingly becoming important as more and more colleges of education and ed prep providers start to ask questions about what they can do to advance not necessarily just next education workforce, but the movement of strategic school staffing. And so the next slide is Q&A. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen because you don't need to see the Q&A slide. But we'd love to open it up to some questions from you all just about the work.
Thank you, Brent, and thank you, Lennon, for a very insightful conversation. Just opening it up. Any questions or comments?
So I've gotten to see the classes here and the model, and I know you're shifting things all the time. What have you seen in terms of similarities and differences across all of these different sites that you're working? Do you see kind of universally some things as well as some really, big distinctions in what you have to do to adjust to the types of systems there are?
Sure, I'll take that one. Brent just pointed at me. So what's interesting is having been both a teacher in Mesa as they were implementing this work, and then now leading some of this work in Albuquerque. At the systems level, at least, of course, like every texture of school systems is different. Albuquerque is a unionized district, and they've got a very strong union. And I think that is it's not uncharacteristic of school systems, but in our work, it's new to our school. And one of the things that we've really been thinking about is, for instance, equality of collaborative planning time across teaming and non-teaming schools, because that is a feature that's written into the negotiated agreement. I think a feature that might be more on the similar side, down not at the system level, but down at the educator team level or at the school level, is really human dynamics. I think we underemphasize in teacher prep the role of human dynamics in a lot of this work, and it's really easy. I remember disagreeing with someone in my hallway, and you know what? I really didn't have to talk to them if I didn't want to. I could close my door, I could ignore them in the hallway, and maybe see them, and at some point we'd convene back together and we'd be friends again. But when you're working so collaboratively, one of the skills that I don't know if and I know actually I do know we're working on it in some places. Denise is. But I don't know if we comprehensively or teacher education has necessarily taken a stance on this, which is like, how do you teach, these human beings to be human beings to one another, and where does that fit into the curriculum, and beyond, right? The co-teaching strategies and the interdisciplinary planning and the collaborative planning time. Like at the end of the day, there's a set of principles that we have a member of our team, Kevin Corner, who thinks a lot about this term teammateship. That is really about the kind of knowledge, skills, dispositions around what does it take to be a good teammate. And so I would say right outside of all of the things, because we are taking lots of lessons from special education around co-teaching strategies, around collaborative planning strategies. But one of the most distinguishing features I think that crosses lines is whether you're working in New Mexico or Michigan or California or App State or here in Mesa Public Schools in Arizona or Pendergast, learning how to work with other human beings and collaborate with other human beings has been a really big feature. And often school leaders also aren't prepared to facilitate that. And so we're trying to navigate also preparing school leaders to do this work. So it's not just relying on an ASU implementation coach to go in and help coach people around their dynamics. And that is its own challenge, because school leaders come with their own philosophies of management and leadership. And so I think it's just that would be the biggest similarity that I can think about. Brent, anything else you'd add?
Lightning quick, and then we'll get Sherman. the similarities are far more numerous than the differences across these 126 places. That we, I think, probably have gotten a lot smarter, more sophisticated, more nuanced over the course of the last like 9 years. And that, consequently, there are things that we are anticipating better than we've ever anticipated. And that, top collaborative planning time is a ubiquitous challenge. I think the models are not necessarily more expensive than operating school in a more traditional way, but I think that it often also gets back to, and I think Amber's question in the chat is also highlighting this, that there are various commitments that districts have made. I mean, and some of them are to different tiers of instruction, or raising algebra scores, and that the sorts of teams that someone that's interested in raising algebra scores might design and build could look really differently from a team for a district that was really interested in increasing the retention of their novice teachers. And so I think, Aaron, maybe the part of the answer to your question too is that the variation that we see is often a function of the why for teaming, and that in some ways predictable ways. And the thing that I think that we've become more clear on is don't do teaming because you want to do teaming. Like, that's weird. Do teaming because you have a clear and unambiguous hypothesis that it will make the next thing that you're working on, whether that's, being able to better meet the needs of a diverse set of learners, or that you're trying to increase teacher satisfaction and retention. It really impacts the sort of model that you might build. All right, Sherman.
Yeah, I want to follow up on what you were describing, Lennon, because I've been thinking about, the biggest literature in the area of team teaching is in inclusive environments, very broadly defined. And power dynamics among teachers there is one of the most common themes in the literature, and there's a huge literature in dissertations in that. So I want to follow up and ask about sort of the leadership issues here, because I suspect that they're going to be, among other things, very different relationships of principals and assistant principals towards what I'd call conflict aversion. And that leaders who are conflict averse may not have, or are unlikely to have or exert the skills necessary to manage team dynamics. But that's just a hunch and a prior, and I'm really curious to know what you all think.
I think that's super real, and I think as we continue to learn, for instance, in Albuquerque, about the unique dynamics, for instance, between school leaders and what they have as what they call an instructional council, for instance, which is their site-based union team, and some are stronger than others, and some are not as strong as others, and one of the big key decisions they make, and I'll get to your point, Chair, I promise there's a point to this one, but right, the master schedule, for instance, is a function of the instructional council. The school leader might present a master schedule, and they might say, and the instructional council can say, yep, we adopt that, or no, we don't, and that's the answer for the school. And so, in Albuquerque, I think that's, as we have been figuring out, right, educator team coaching can't be the only thing we do. We actually have to coach, right, and not only gaps, I think, in teacher prep, and that's to say that there's not enough time ever to do everything you need in teacher prep also, right? Like I think that's an acknowledgement. The other is school leader prep. I mean, right, there's so much focus, I think, in school leader prep on the accountability features, the compliance features, the law features, right, focus so heavily on instruction, almost sometimes at the expense of, right, these more broad leadership dynamics. And so as we've been working in Albuquerque, Albuquerque, one of the coaches that we have out there, Amber Day, who is a coach in Mesa Public Schools, has been very focused on coaching leaders through that. And so I think that it's also been, as we've been thinking about sustained change and not just this is an ASU initiative that happens at our school, we get an ASU coach that comes to work with this team. Like we're thinking very deeply, and then again, context dependent, like knowing who the leaders are in the context and their relationships already with the educators at their school around some, right, like what's kind of professional learning, the rehearsal experiences. Sometimes I even think, right, like the in the moment mediation experiences where there's a diffusion because, it's helpful to have the educator team, the principal, and then also the ASU coach in the room to kind of like now it feels more collaborative and not like a top down or something like that. And so, yeah, I think in Albuquerque we're finding more and more that we need to like figure out the right leadership moves that we need to impart and help school leaders to practice, which is a big piece of that.
The that thing that I threw into the chat a little bit ago around the distributed expertise matrix. I mean, this is getting at some of the questions that are being peppered into the chat. This idea that people working together are like they need to buy into this belief, and this is one of the core tenets of the teammateship, is that we are stronger together, that we are better together as a team, and that the power dynamics are super real. And some of what we need to do is we also need to help teams realize that we are greater than the sum of our parts, and that every single one of us has something really powerful to contribute, and to highlight some of those areas of skill and passion, and let people lean into particular areas of expertise. We're seeing some examples in Mesa, for instance, Brad Thompson, doc student, who was looking at special educators in these Mesa teams in the context, was seeing that when a team can have a special educator as a full-time member of the team, and sometimes you can get those. At the end of the day, it's a money thing, right? You got to get the ratios right to be able to justify the full inclusion of a special educator. But like we are seeing, the like universal design for learning far more possible. We are seeing, one of my favorite anecdotes is right, like special educators saying like, I like sometimes I have to tell general educators not to come to the IEP meetings because like we've got too many voices in there, like, and people are invested in new and different ways. And, that to me is sort of, and not just for our special educators, but also for paraeducators, for example, like how are they seen not as something less than, but also a key contributor to the team. And some of this is just the way that we work early and often with teams to try to get those dynamics right. I could keep talking, but Teresa, let's go to you.
Me?
Oh yes, please.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I just, it seems to me that you have such a wonderful opportunity to also do professional development for teachers in terms of the knowledge and other things that they need to know, like updated on, mathematics, science, kind of the curriculum that they need to know and more knowledge on that. So it just seems fantastic. By the way, congratulations on what you're doing. I just love it. I think it's fantastic. And I did miss an opportunity from Lennon to participate, but I will be very happy in participating. I think one of the points that I wanted to make is that we need to see teachers as learners as well. So I see a lot of emphasis on, restructuring the school, participation, emphasis on that. But, teachers, just to the point that Sherman made, the relational staff, how teachers manage that, I think is something that needs to be learned. So as I said, I'm going to send you a paper, but this is something that actually is taken for granted in teacher education programs and professional development. How do you learn to develop conducive, productive relationships with your peers? And so the findings come from a huge study from Thales, So I'll send you the several countries that participated in this kind of thing. But bravo for what you're doing. It's amazing. It's very, it's very brave, and I'm sure it's taking so much energy. But I love what you're doing. Thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you. And on this professionalism piece, like a couple of things. There's the teammateship piece that I pasted in there. Educator improvement and sustainability is a new element. We've got 6 elements that we've refined over 9 years now. This is another one. They're not totally ready to send to you as a PDF, but take feedback as always. And this idea of educator improvement and sustainability and building in intentionally, the unit becomes the unit of team, not individual. And so, for example, in Arizona, we've in a few schools where we're participating in some pilot work around high quality instruction materials meets teaming and unit and lesson internalization. And what we're finding is that one, the adoption of the curriculum is like sub 10%. And then once it's sort of introduced to the concept of teaming, goes to 100% implementation, because unlike a one teacher, one classroom, you could kind of close your door and be like, guess what? I'm not teaching really that curriculum. When you're together as a team, what we're finding is that there is a lot more exchange and accountability. And again, vulnerability. You have to create the conditions where you're like, you know what? I don't really know how to teach this, or I don't know how to teach this well. And the team is self-improving in that way, where they're holding each other to account. They're working with each other. And so we're really excited to see some of what's happening instructionally in the context of these team-based models. But again, it gets back to having that common planning time, that without that, it can't and doesn't happen, or doesn't happen as easily. And so we're finding that common planning time becomes like the engine for this idea of educator improvement.
The other piece, I think, to your point in the chat around just professional status, I think about the Richard Ingersoll and I and Mary Lasky at the Center on Reinventing Public Education did a study with some teacher working condition data around teacher autonomy. Right, we know autonomy is a feature of the profession, and found that those on teams reported higher levels of autonomy in their workplace settings. But interestingly, right, when we actually used that to help produce predictive, right, log odds, we were like, oh, just because you build teams doesn't mean that, right, teacher turnover is going to reduce. Like, teams that don't have high autonomy actually had similar turnover rates to traditional classroom teachers. Teams with really high autonomy, their odds were only about 6% of turning over. So 22% on the other end, 6% if you were a team with high autonomy. And so, one of the things that Richard found really interesting when he came to visit, one of the teams was telling them about, this isn't necessarily an uncommon practice, but we think that teams really amplify this practice of like, oh, I have a teammate who's leaving, we need to replace the teammate. Let's all be in on the hiring interviews together and make this decision collectively about who we're bringing into onto our team. But the opposite was also true on this particular team that he was visiting, where they said, this teammate did not really work out well for us. Like, we think it's time for them to go. And then they had a conversation as a team about that. And so I think about, right, I've been thinking a lot just about the professionalism and like how leaning into a team-based approach might actually, I'm thinking about Richard's book. I'm thinking about your work too, right? Just around teacher professionalism and how it's a little bit underexplored, but like it would be super powerful to do a little bit more work there. And with a captive audience, I think also we have lots of educators that are want us to listen to them, which we should be doing more of always, and would love to capture just around the professional status being elevated by being part of a team, or the places where teaming might be hindering that. I think would also be very, very useful and important and interesting.
So I would love to join you, and the reason I couldn't join you is because I was going to a conference. But I'm
I'll
very
send you an
happy to
email.
talk.
I'm gonna send you another email, and we'll chat more.
All right,
Yes.
sounds great.
Well, thank you for such an engaging conversation. This was wonderful. Amber, did we get your response to the question that you had in your chat? I was just keeping an eye on that.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, all right. So we don't have a just an hour session next week because most everybody is going and visiting AERA. So just wanted to remind us, but the following week we would be receiving a reminder. And I would just like you to just wishing you all of us a peaceful and reflective Friday. And with that, we would just bring a closure to this session. Thanks again, Brent and Lennon, for joining us.
Thanks.